Balkans War in the 1990s. And in Syria, government planes have bombed towns in the provinces of Idlib and Aleppo. To Cuba, where strict travel restrictions have been in place for more than half a century. Well, now they're finally being relaxed. It is the latest stage of President Raul Castro's 5-year reform plan. Under the current rules, Cubans need an exit visa to leave and an invitation letter from someone in the country they're visiting. So this is being relaxed. In other words, only a passport and, if necessary, visa will be needed. Travellers are also allowed to stay out of the country for a maximum of 11 months at the moment, but this is being increased to 24 months with the possibility to extend. The stricter rules are likely to stay in place, though, for doctors and other professionals. Cuba doesn't want to leave. More now from John Terrett.
For more than 50 years, Cubans have endured the kind of restrictions and obstacles to travel abroad that few, if any, citizens in the world have had to face. Until now, Cubans wanting to travel to see friends or relatives have had to pay a small fortune, which most can't afford, for paperwork and permits that allow them to leave the country for up to 1 month. For every additional month they want to stay abroad, they must pay more. If they fail to return to Cuba after 11 months and 1 day, they lose all their property and their right to live in Cuba. That's what happened to Alexander Munoz, an entertainer who works at a Cuban nightclub in the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires.
I don't understand why we need to ask for permission to enter and leave when it is our place, our land, and even if one lives abroad, it's where my roots are.
Even under the new rules, which extend to 24 months the time Cubans can be away, doctors, scientists and members of the Cuban military will still be subject to restrictions. On the streets of Havana, the news was given a cautious welcome.
This benefits both Cubans and the government. There were too many obstacles to leave. Now things are changing and everything will get better.
To be fair, we must first have clear understanding of the new law. It's not good to give an opinion before it's clear, but I hope that everything will be good for everyone.
In Little Havana, in Miami, Florida, home to thousands of Cuban immigrants, the optimism was also muted.
It should have been done many, many years ago. Many Cubans should be celebrating. There's a new way of getting out of Cuba after so much repression. There is a legal process now.
In principle, it sounds excellent. A real step forward, but we still don't understand the fine print of the law.
Cuba watchers say lifting travel restrictions for the majority of Cubans is the most significant step so far in President Raul Castro's 5-year plan of reform that's already seen the legalization of home and car sales and a big increase in the number of Cubans who own their own business. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's cross to Washington, where we're joined by Eric Farnsworth. And Eric is Vice President of the Council of the Americas. Eric, are we making too much of this? I mean, after all, they're just taking away the qualification of a letter of invitation, aren't they?
Well, no, I think it is an important step from the Cuban perspective. This has been an issue that has been really a thorn in the side of Cuban citizens since 1961. And no matter if Cubans have been supporters of the regime or opponents of the regime, it's really a universally reviled policy to restrict people from leaving the island. So from that perspective, I think it's an important symbolic step, if nothing else. So, and it's part of the Raul Castro effort to try to liberalize very slowly, very episodically, but to liberalize aspects of Cuba's economy.
Okay, so symbolic, but at the same time, could the exit permit change, do you think, speed up a general level of reform in Cuba?
Well, it's possible. It could actually end up embarrassing the regime if a lot of Cuban citizens line up in front of foreign embassies and look for visas to those countries. And from that perspective, it could lead to increased reforms. But for the most part, I think this is actually done to give political space and economic space to the regime. The fact of the matter is the Cuban economy has not been creating jobs at the pace that the regime would like, and so this is an opportunity for citizens who want to migrate abroad for a couple of years, perhaps, to get jobs overseas and also then send remittances back to Cuba. So from that perspective, I think it's consistent with the reforms, not necessarily going to speed them up. I think it's part of the overall process.
Well, to be fair, no country in the world has been creating jobs as much as they want to, including the United States. But restrictions on various classes of profession, especially Cuba, because we all know Cuba has a world-class 5-star health system.
Well, that's exactly right, and what they don't want is a brain drain. They don't want to lose the people that the regime has invested most heavily in, whether those be doctors, whether they be military members, whether they be representatives of the regime itself, and these are people that the Cuban regime values very highly, and so they still want to be able to control who leaves the island and who doesn't, so the restrictions will remain in place on those people.
Is this a sign of gradual liberalization by Raul Castro? That's the question that everybody wants to know. It does seem to be a slight relaxing of the atmosphere, and so you wonder whether there's going to be generally accepted reforms coming in more quickly now, or are there still enough Castro supporters, his brother's supporters, who don't want Cuba to progress?
Well, that's exactly the intellectual battle that's going on right now on the island. How far and how fast, and what is the end game? And I think most people would suggest that this is a Cuban version of perestroika, if you will. In other words, the regime is trying to reform itself to save itself. And therefore, it's not looking to fundamentally change the economy or certainly the politics of the island, but rather to take steps that will strengthen its own control over the island. And so this is consistent with this, but I would not anticipate that these reforms would lead to a wholesale opening up of Cuba's economy, for example. I think it's consistent with a Cuban perestroika approach.
Interesting. All right, Eric Farnsworth, many thanks for joining us in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much.
Let's go back to Colombia now, where a government delegation has just set off for Norway.